Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We'll start the official program now. This is the second G. Ramachandran Memorial Lecture being organized jointly with Southern India Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the G. Ramachandran Memorial Committee. We are fortunate to have Sri Shaktikant Das, IAS, Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. We will have a minute silence as a mark of respect and we'll commence the proceedings. A tribute to Mr. G. Ramachandran. A minute silence. Thank you. Before I request Mr. Ganapati, the Vice President of the Southern India Chamber of Commerce, to deliver the formal welcome address, I request Mr. Ganapati to welcome Sri Shaktikant Das with a bouquet of flowers. Thank you, sir. I request Mr. Ganapati to deliver the formal welcome address, please.
It's not often that you have the opportunity of wearing two hats on behalf of my father's memorial committee and also on behalf of SICI. I have the unique privilege and honor of welcoming Mr. Shaktikant Das, Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Government of India. A person who's part of our family, Mr. K. Venkatesan, former Secretary, Ministry of Finance. I will, of course, come back and offer a few comments about his contribution to the nation. At the outset, and of course, Mr. Raghavan, Dr. Raghavan, Secretary of the Chambers, distinguished invitees, friends, relatives. At the outset, as I said, it's my honor to welcome Mr. Shaktikant Das, Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Government of India, this evening. And I also thank him for agreeing to our request to interact with the participants today. I welcome the members of my father's family who are here and thank them for the assistance in organizing this event. As you may be aware, the US has put the financial crisis behind it. Consumer spending is rising at a healthy 3%. Nominal wages are beginning to edge up in response to a tighter labor market, leaving the Federal Reserve poised to increase interest rates for the first time since 2006. Europe was slower in dealing with its debt and always tends to lag behind US and Britain in its economic cycle. Nevertheless, it is having its best year of growth since 2011. It is for these reasons, among others, that the IMF is predicting that the world GDP will pick up to 3.6% next year. On the other hand, after a long period of rapid economic growth, Asia's emerging economies appear to have entered a transitional phase. For decades, emerging Asian economies have been among the fastest growing and most dynamic in the world. Supported by an export-oriented development model, annual growth averaged 7.5% in the 3 decades leading up to the global financial crisis. As many have noted over the years, maintaining growth sufficiently rapid to meet the developmental aspirations of the region will require a transition towards an economic paradigm more rooted in domestic demand, particularly consumption. The need for this transition or rebalancing is most apparent and also widely acknowledged in China, the current hub of emerging Asia's export-led model. Now, the stage is set for India to provide a new economic growth engine for Asian development. In principle, India has enormous potential to recharge the Asian growth engine. All told, while the export-led growth model that propelled growth in China and other economies in emerging Asia has matured, pushing down growth rates, India remains at a relatively early stage of its development trajectory. Further capital depending and the potential for further productivity gains suggest that India could maintain rapid economic growth for a number of years. As mentioned by various experts, India is also a young country with a relatively low dependency ratio and a growing workforce. Finally, there is much expectancy from the industry over the creation of a unified all India economic space by implementing the goods and services tax. The SICI welcomed the announcement in recent union budget to introduce the GST from April 2016 with the offer to compensate the state governments for the loss of the revenue for a period 5 years and commended the stand of the government to usher in this important legislation. Though the finance minister stated his intention to tap the benefit of the demographic dividend, the SICI was of the view that the budget has missed the opportunity to provide incentives for job creation. Given India's dismal track record in creating meaningful opportunities in its burgeoning young population. While the minister announced tax-free infra bonds for road, rail, and irrigation projects, the chamber believed that there could have been a further expansion of the scope of government investment in the infrastructure sector. That said, significant roadblocks need to be overcome for India to reach its full potential. Likewise, efforts at difficult reform will have to be sustained. There's much hard work ahead if India is to come closer to fulfilling the potential that it is so manifestly has, and we are comforted by the fact that Mr. Das heads that department. At this juncture, I would like to say a few words about the Chamber, which was founded in 1909 and has now crossed a centenary year. On an ongoing basis, the SICI undertakes various initiatives to act as catalyst for industrial growth in the state. Knowledge missions are facilitated, meetings with state government officials at the highest level are arranged, training programs that focus on key skills are provided, and awareness on new policies enforced by the government is created through interactions of members with policymakers. The key outcome of all these initiatives helps in creating a conducive climate for seamless development in this region. With these few words, I wish you a fruitful and intellectually enriching learning experience today, and once again, on your behalf, I welcome Mr. Shakti Kanta Das, Secretary, Department of Economic Affairs, Government of India. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sir, you have another opportunity also. May I request Mr. Ganapati to introduce Mr. Venkatesan, IAS retired. He will be addressing on the tribute to Mr. G. Ramachandran.
I just heard somebody say the bad penny comes back. Dignitaries on and off the dais, it's my privilege to introduce to you a friend of the family for over 50 years. I still remember the day in Ooty, which was the destination for children of IAS officers then, as it is not now, where the annual collectors conference would take place. I still remember the journey from Ooty back to Coimbatore, and for the first time in a car which was called the Standard Herald coupe, and my sister who is here and I were on the back seat while my brother was with my parents in another car. Mrs. Venkatesan here and Mr. can vouchsafe that that was one of the most exciting car journeys we ever had, not in terms of driving speeds, but in terms of the amount of knowledge that was transferred into a 10-year-old. The basis for a lifelong friendship was laid. I may also add that every family has its own directory of friends. And in that directory, somebody has to be like Abu Ben Adam at the top, very top. For us, the go-to man was always Mr. Venkatesan. And the man who we didn't see every day, but the man who had us in his heart every minute so far. I must also add that his journey in the Indian Administrative Service was almost similar to my father's. Finance Secretary here, Secretary Ministry of Finance in Delhi after being Secretary Power, Government of India, and then finally the Asian Development Bank as its Executive Director. The only difference was we lived in T Nagar and he lived in Anna Nagar. But I can't believe, and I'm sure every member of my family here shares that sentiment, that nobody better could pay tribute to my late father than Mr. Venkatesan. Mama, please. It's a privilege and honor to have you with us. Thank you.
Mr. Saktikandas, Mr. Ganapati, office bearers of Southern India Chamber of Commerce, members of Southern India Chamber of Commerce, distinguished guests, I am thankful for this opportunity given to me and thank Ganapati for the nice words he has spoken about me. Actually, about Mr. GR, as we refer to him always, the brief profile given in the invitation almost covers the complete record of his service. However, I would like to elaborate a few points which might not have been mentioned there, but which may be of relevance. Actually, it says he was first in MA Economics in Madras University. Actually, the aggregate marks he took in that exam was not beaten for more than a decade, and that was held as a record for more than a decade. Again, as in academic studies, he stood first in the competitive exam, and he served as personal secretary to Chief Minister Rajaji after Mr. Sabhanayagam, who is with us today. We are grateful and happy to have him here. Mr. Sabhanayagam was the first private secretary to Mr. Rajaji when he became the Chief Minister. And Mr. GR succeeded him as private secretary to the Chief Minister. And he has worked with a number of chief ministers. Then when the change of political government took place in 1967, Mr. Annadurai, as popularly called as Anna, was the chief minister and also finance minister. And the first budget, when the discussion was taking place, I was at that time deputy secretary with him. I joined him in 1963, December. I joined service in 60. 2 years of sub-collector, 1 year as training, and first as under-secretary. I joined him. He was joint secretary under legendary T.A. Verghese, who took him specially to hand over charge as finance secretary. When Mr. budget discussion was going on, Mr. Anna raised a point. I want to make a policy decision about a social reform scheme. Without batting an eyelid, GR said, "Sir, any policy announcement should be in the governor's address, which is equivalent to president's speech, and budget is meant only for financial matters. So how is it that you want to make it into this?" Normally, anybody in today's context would not think of saying such an open thing. And Anna appreciated it. And in his own way, he made some modifications and included the program in the budget. That's a different story. You would have seen that he has worked under various regimes, various political dispensations, mainly because he has never hesitated to say what he felt right and was not anticipating what would be expected of him. He had In his work style, he believed in delegation and division of work. I have worked with him. When the budget is to be presented, we will arrange 2 stenographers for him so that he can continuously dictate, because one fellow cannot handle so much. But once it is over, he will allow the Deputy Secretary, Joint Secretary to deal with it and won't hesitate, won't interfere with them. Look, I have handed over the thing, you deliver the result. This he has applied in his own personal life also. I would like to mention here, as far as the finances, running the household, managing the delegation, I won't say delegation, it's a division of labor completely with Mrs. GR. And I would also like to mention here the simple lifestyle and the impeccable honesty for which Mr. GR is known is not in a small measure due to the support and same value system Mrs. GR had and supported him. I don't want to go into other details of his official work with which I have been closely associated. I would only like to sum up by saying his was a career really unblemished, something which is an envy of most of us and most of the youngsters, and whose life was simple and his thoughts were noble. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. May I now request Mr. Chella Krishna, Executive Committee member of the Chamber and the partner CNGSM, to introduce the chief guest.
Dignitaries on and off the dais, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me immense pleasure to introduce to this gathering Sri Shaktikanta Das, IAS, Secretary Economic Affairs, Ministry of Finance, Government of India. Mr. Das, a postgraduate from the famed St. Stephen's College, has occupied several posts at centre and state level, spanning the entire gamut of governance. His achievements at the Tamil Nadu state level are hallmark and legendary in nature. He has left his stamp on almost every department that he has worked in. Some of his achievements in Tamil Nadu were in preparing an industrial policy for the state in 1991 and 2007. He was instrumental in setting up India's most successful SEZ project, Mahindra World City, and played a key role in transforming the Uragadam and Sri Perumbudur area into a manufacturing hub for the auto and electronic sector. The entry of Renault and Nissan in Tamil Nadu is to his credit. Even in the usually placid area of tourism, he helped launch the brand of Tamil Nadu and the catchphrase, "Enchanting Tamil Nadu, experience yourself." His role in Delhi has been so far remarkable, to say the least. He has held the post of Joint Secretary and Additional Secretary Budget in the DEA, and as well as the position of Secretary Department of Fertilizer. He has been directly involved in finalizing 6 union budgets. His role as Revenue Secretary resulted in several successes. One of the key successes was the signing of the FATCA with the US, which resulted in sharing of information on both sides as far as foreign bank accounts are concerned. This is a big milestone in India's fight against black money held abroad. In his current position as Secretary Economic Affairs, he has already helped in facilitating the complete opening up of FDI in real estate by easing size and lock-in restrictions in large measure. He has been nominated by the government to the board of SEBI and RBI. In short, Mr. Das has moved mountains in different environments. He reminds us of Sri G. Ramachandran, who has also had a similar stint in Chennai and a very successful stint in Delhi. Who better to address us today? Ladies and gentlemen, I have pleasure in presenting to you Mr. Shaktikanta Das.
Srimati Subulakshmi Ramachandran, Sri Venkateshan, Sri Ganapati, Sri Raghavan, distinguished members in the audience, senior colleagues from the administrative service, members of the Southern India Chamber of Commerce and Industries, friends, representatives from media, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be talking to you on this important occasion of the second G. Ramachandran Memorial Lecture. This was started last year by the family, and I consider it as a matter of privilege and honor to have been given this opportunity to address the second memorial lecture. I have met Mr. G. Ramachandran several times in various social gatherings, never officially really, but in various social gatherings I have met him, and I have seen in him a person who was extremely cordial, very friendly, not concerned about his seniority, about which all of us in the service are very much conscious, and he always treated me as with lot of friendliness and with lot of openness. I once again would like to say and would like to thank the family and the Southern India Chamber of Commerce and for giving me this opportunity to be here. I have had the opportunity also of going through the book, the autobiography written by, obviously, by Sri G. Ramachandran, and I think I must compliment the family that before his final journey began, they were able to put together this book. When Ganapati presented that book to me in Delhi, I was really touched, and I have gone through that book, every page, every line. And it gave me an insight into a very critical period of Indian history, especially the Indian economic history, the Indian economic and fiscal policy making in the 70s and in the 80s. It also gives an insight into the way politics operates in our country, the way he has described the transition from one government to the other government, and how an officer remains unscathed despite the change in governments, despite the change in government from one political party to the other political party. It once again reinforces our faith in the service and in the system that if one is professional and if one maintains a respectable distance from the politics which surrounds many of us in the civil service, who right from the day one of our service have to work very closely with the members of the public and with the politicians. If one maintains a respectable distance, if one maintains a certain level of professional standard and integrity in one's career, then it is possible to navigate throughout one's career. I was really touched by reading that book, and the book occupies a very prominent place in my personal bookshelf, along with so many other important books which I always like to keep in my personal bookshelf at home. I was asked to speak on the state of Indian economy. The Indian economy today, it all depends how you decide to look at it. Some people may describe that these are challenging times. Some people describe that these are difficult times. For some people, these are times of opportunity. It all depends on one's point of view, how one looks at where the Indian economy today stands. Before I go into talking about the current economic situation, one needs to put things in a certain historical context and in a certain historical perspective. As a country, as an economy, we have moved in the last 67, 68 years since independence. We have moved a lot. Our economy has made a great amount of transition, both in its content and in its form. We started as some kind of a mixed economy, more towards center, more towards left of the center, following the Soviet model, started with the 5-year plans of the 1950s, which did deliver in a certain sense in creating certain basic infrastructure for the country, certain basic manufacturing capability in the country in the form of the steel plants, in the form of the multipurpose hydroelectricity projects, in the form of the heavy engineering projects, the BHEL, the SAIL, and the like. It also created a strong body of professionals, technical professionals in the country. In the 60s, the country witnessed tremendous food crisis, and the country had to sort of take resort to sort of borrowing, and India was not self-sufficient in food grains, so we had in that background we had to go for the PL 480 program, under which food grains had to be obtained from the US. But then India launched this massive drive of green revolution, and the rest is history. As I always wish to mention, that the Green Revolution achieved self-sufficiency in food grains, but it also somewhere took away the nutritional content of our food habits. Our rural people who earlier ate a lot of cereals, lot of this other kinds of cereals which are high in nutrition, we shifted more to rice and wheat. So the nutrition content went down. I'm not trying to find fault with the Green Revolution policy, because it's always easy to say things in hindsight. But nonetheless, the Green Revolution has achieved a lot. Then we had the era of the bank nationalization, the abolition of the privy purses. Then the 80s, when the computers got introduced into the country, when technology was moving into the economy, into the global economy, and into the Indian economy in a great way. Late 70s, China shifted to more of liberalization. India took its own time. 1991, as you know, was the beginning of the economic reforms. In 1991, one of the key things that happened was the delicensing of industries, which is often forgotten by several people, by many people. In 1991, everybody talks of the budgets which were presented during that year, during that particular year, but many of us forget that a few days before the budget was presented, almost the entire industrial manufacturing sector was delicensed. And I think that was perhaps the biggest reform, perhaps bigger than what came subsequently in the budget. What came subsequently in the budget was very important. I am not trying to belittle its importance, but I think the delicensing of industries, the freeing up of industries, the requirement of having to go to Udyog Bhavan in New Delhi, where the Ministry of Industries is located, to get an industrial license, or to go for every time you want to increase capacity of production, or you want to diversify, to go for a license, to go for a permission, all that thing was liberalized. So a lot of growth forces were unleashed in 1991. And as a country, I think after 1991, we have not looked behind. The pace of reforms, economic reforms in the country has had its speed, sometimes little bit of inertia, sometimes the momentum has been stronger, but it has always been unidirectional. It has always moved in the direction of reforms and more reforms, notwithstanding the change of governments in between, notwithstanding the change of political complexion of the ruling party in Delhi. I think that speaks volumes for the strength of economic reforms and the realization of all of us Indians as a population, as a society, that economic reforms are very important. In the late 90s, we had this emphasis on the building up of the infrastructure, especially on roads, on the telecom revolution, and the entire the way technology spread, computers spread into each and every area of our life. All these happened in the late 90s and in the early in the 21st century, in the early part of the 21st century. That brings us to 2008. So I would like to more start with 2008 and then quickly come to where we stand today. 2008, as you know, the big financial crisis, the meltdown around the big financial institutions in the US, the Lehman Brothers crisis, it sort of completely marked watershed in economic history, in the global economic history. In United States, what had happened is that there was this kind of a shadow banking system which had developed without adequate regulations. The belief in free market the belief in free market, the forces of free market had created a situation where lot of financial institutions, lot of new financial instruments, lot of new methods of financing, methods of leveraging on certain assets to get more finance, so had taken place, but most of it was unregulated, and that formed a kind of a whole lot of shadow banking system which was highly unregulated. It was perhaps thought by the policy thinkers in US that that is the best way to sort of unleash growth, to see that money is available, there is money supply in the economy, and it did, of course, when it worked. I mean, there is a saying that nothing succeeds like success. So when it succeeded, everybody praised it. Till, of course, the crisis set in 2008, when the whole thing, it's like a bubble, when the bubble burst. That set a chain of global financial crisis, and almost every country was impacted. In India, because of our, I think, slightly conservative regulations, particularly coming from our central bank and from the conservative policies of the government over the decades, we were fairly well insulated from the impact of the global financial crisis which originated in the United States in 2008. But then because of the slowdown in US, we were impacted. Our exports to US fell, and naturally the flow of money to US to other economies, that also fell. In that background, most of the countries undertook fiscal expansion, fiscal and monetary expansion. What we mean by fiscal and monetary expansion is that governments started spending more on infrastructure and in other kinds of expenditure mainly to sort of give a boost to the domestic demand, give a boost to the local manufacturing, to sustain the local manufacturing activities. And monetary expansion means that the central banks, whether it is the United States Federal Reserve or the central banks of other countries, including our Reserve Bank also, they pump in lot of liquidity, lot of money into the market so that more money is available in the hands of the people, and the money will give a boost to consumption. In India also, we adopted that policy of monetary and fiscal expansion. It worked for about 2 to 3 years. So as a result, the decline in growth which we witnessed in 2008-9 and 9-10, it was reversed, and in 10-11 and in 11-12, the country again recorded 7.5%, almost near 8% or little above 8% growth. But then all these kind of expansionary policies also have their negative effects. So the negative effect of that was high inflation and high government borrowings, leaving little money for the private sector to borrow from the banks and to invest. Because the banking system has a certain quantum of resources, a certain quantum of liquidity which is available for investment. So when government borrows more, you leave less resources available for the private sector investment. So excessive borrowing by the government during these years, it took away, it sort of created a lot of strain in the availability of resources for private sector investment. And when there is more money circulation, I'm not going into the theory of it, but it's a question of demand and supply. When there was more money circulation, in other words, there was more money chasing less quantum of goods, naturally the prices went up, and it resulted in very high inflation. The consumer price index, the CPI inflation, crossed 10%, and that became a matter of serious concern. So the global response was monetary and fiscal expansion. India's response was monetary and fiscal expansion. And India did, I'm just putting again things in perspective, India, we recorded some revival, but then we were hit by inflation and the other associated problems. But fortunately, because of the policies that have been undertaken by the government, today India is far better placed than most of the other countries in the world. The IMF on number of occasions has described India as the brightest spot in the global economic scenario. India is the only country today which is recording, I think, the highest growth. China was higher till about last year, but this year they say that Chinese growth will be about 6%. The growth of Chinese GDP will be about 6.8%. Whereas in India, last year we recorded 7.3%, and this year we are looking at about 7.5% growth. Now, several times it has been asked, what is this growth? Why this growth is so important? I mean, how, in what way it makes a difference to the common man? It makes a difference, to put it very simplistically, it makes a difference to the common man because growth means more purchasing power in the hands of the people, more jobs, more economic activity, and more, a greater boost to the local, to the domestic demands, and more resources in the hands of the government. When there is growth, naturally the revenue collections, the tax collections of the government go up, and that gives greater spending power, greater spending capability to government to spend more in infrastructure and other welfare schemes, other development schemes for the people. So therefore, growth is very essential. We are not, I am not entering into, this theory of percolation, that is, if there is growth at the top, the impact will percolate down, will flow down. I am not going into the theory part of it. I am putting it in a very simple, common, just as a common person would understand, growth would mean more revenue to the government, more development expenditure. Growth would mean more jobs, more money in the hands of the people, and general all-around economic activity. So all around, when the economic activity is more, naturally the people overall will stand to gain. So India today records a growth of 7.5%. We are expecting this year that we will record 7.5%, and we are looking at touching 8% next year. Even in the recently concluded G20 meeting, which I was fortunate to attend, there was all-round consensus that countries like India need to act as global growth drivers. The revival of United States economy is still slow. It's steady, but it is, it's slow and steady. There are signs of more jobs getting created in the US economy. There are signs of more economic activity happening in the United States. And let me also mention that if US revives, it is good news for India, not because many of our youngsters, young professionals go and work in that country and look forward to working in United States, but it also means a lot of opportunities for our industry, for our textile industry, for our IT industry in particular, which depends a lot on the US markets. So US revival of US growth is slow and steady. Eurozone continues to be in crisis. The growth is very, very feeble, prompting the European Central Bank, the European Central Bank, the governor of the European Central Bank, Mario Draghi, he made a statement just 2 days ago saying that they will have to inject more money into the system. So it means that according to their understanding, Europe is still not out of problem, and the European recession probably will continue for some more time. And on top of that, the entire the entire terrorist crisis, the crisis built around terrorism is something which is now being faced by Europe for the first time. What impact it has on their economic activities and on the functioning of their economy is something which only time will tell. So far as Indian economy is concerned, we are obviously not living in an isolated world, and I think the whole world is looking at India to be a growth driver. But having said that, I must also admit that the share of India in the global GDP is very, very small. So we should not really overestimate our capability. But sometimes in terms of making a policy statement, or sometimes in terms of voicing an opinion, I have found in my experience in the recent years that we have a greater voice than what our economy actually entitles us to. In any international forum, it is always United States which dominates the dialogue. That is because they are the biggest economy in the world. Of late, China has a lot of voice, but for their own strategic reasons or whatever, their approach is that Chinese do not talk much in any international gathering. I think they probably believe in doing more and talking less. European countries, of course, traditional members of the OECD, whether it is UK, France, or Germany, they talk in the same language, and they obviously their voice carries a lot of weight. Now, other than that, it is India today. In today's context, I have seen it in several international events, including the latest G20 meeting, which concluded last Monday on 15th and 16th, it took place in Antalya in Turkey. I found that India's voice is being heard with a lot of respect and with a lot of attention. And the whole world is today looking at China and India. China, the growth has slowed down, but we have to remember two things. Number one, the Chinese political system and its strength to bounce back should not be underestimated. Chinese political system is not it's not a really, you cannot call it a democratic system the way we understand democracy in our country. So the Chinese political system, because of its strength, sheer strength to push down decisions, should be able to encounter many of their challenges. But then there is, we need more information to understand what exactly is happening in China, but we should not underestimate their capability. Second thing is, the Chinese slowdown is on a higher base. So when we say it is 6.8%, it is 6.8% growth on a much higher base. There are countries which are far below, and if they record a higher percentage of growth, that cannot be compared just arithmetically with 6.8% growth of China. So Chinese growth, even at 6.8%, is fairly strong because it's on a higher base. Now that takes us to India. But before I mention about India, let me also mention that there were a lot of expectations that the African countries should revive. In fact, Africa today presents a lot, it's a continent of lot of opportunities, lot of potential. But I think Africa will take, what I feel is that Africa will take at least another 8 to 10 years to fix their political problems, to fix problems of civil strife, to have strong and democratic governments, and to fix the problem of their infrastructure. So maybe Africa, if not 8 to 10, Africa should take about another 6 to 8 years at least to show some better rate of growth. Now that leaves India as perhaps the only country among the emerging nations which is recording this kind of growth. So therefore India today has to be the global growth driver. And I think as citizens of this country, whether we are in government or we are in outside, wherever we are, all of us have a very crucial responsibility to see that whatever task is assigned to us, we do it in a manner that we play a leading role in the coming years and decades. So talking about the growth, there is tremendous potential. We are at 7.5%. We are targeting 8% growth next year. Next is I'm just highlighting on some of the key economic indicators now. The first, I have talked about the India's growth figures. Second is the inflation. Inflation, as I mentioned a little while ago, it had reached consumer price inflation, which affects all of us who go to the market every day to buy our foodstuff or any other thing, textiles or whatever. It had the consumer price index, had the CPI inflation had exceeded 10%, 9 to 10% a few years ago. But today it is under control, and in the last 2 to 3 months, the consumer price CPI inflation has come down to about 4.5 to 5%. Last month, in October, it was 5%. The previous month, it was about 4.4%. So it is ranging between 4.5 to 5%. Our inflation today is mainly accounted for, of course, I must say that we have been quite fortunate and quite lucky in having lower crude prices. Because of the lower crude prices, it has had an effect on our lower inflation. So we have benefited out of the international, global oil prices. Now that cannot be denied. The inflation today, the consumer price inflation remains at 5%, mainly because of one or two items, and one major item is the price of pulses. I'm sure all of you would have been affected by the rising price of pulses in the last 1 or 2 months. Now, why that happened was that our domestic demand is about 22 million tons of pulses. Our domestic production is about 18 million tons of pulses. 22, it's about 19 million tons of pulses, and we import about 3 million tons from other countries, from Myanmar and other countries, primarily from Myanmar. What happened in the last 1 year is that the global production fell. Whether it is Myanmar or other countries, the global production has gone down. India's own production has also gone down. So therefore, you have greater demand and supply has come down. So therefore, the prices have gone up. Now, it's very easy to sort of say that, I mean, yes, it pinches all of us that suddenly the price of pulses, which were in the region of 30 rupees or 40 rupees, have crossed 100, 150 rupees, and briefly it even touched 150 rupees. But the point is, globally, there was a shortage of production, there was a decline in production. Now, what is to be seen is that how the government has responded to this situation. Now, obviously, immediately you cannot change this situation overnight. What government did was to direct the government agencies to procure pulses from other countries. International prices went up, but notwithstanding that, a huge quantity of pulses were imported, and with a lot of government support, financial support, these pulses were released in the markets. So that had a slightly sobering effect, a tempering and a moderating impact on our price of pulses. Then there was huge anti-hoarding operations which were launched in states like Maharashtra and other places, and lot of almost 1 lakh tons of pulses which were kept in godowns and all that was taken out. And now the latest, government has taken a very bold policy decision, which was just taken about a week or two ago, is to have a minimum support price, MSP, for pulses. So when you have a minimum support price assured to the pulses, and that the minimum support price is also kept about, it's kept little higher. In fact, the growth I think they have given is about 10% or so over the normal prices. So when the farmers are assured of a good return, because when you have a MSP, the minimum support price, it means that when open market prices are lower, the farmers will sell it to the government or to the government agencies, and government agencies will procure that pulses at that particular rate. So we expect the acreage, the total area under cultivation in pulses, to go up significantly in the next year. So this MSP decision is a very welcome decision. It's a very bold decision, and it will have its impact, I think, from the next crop season. But coming back to inflation, the consumer price index remains at about 4.5%, which is much better than what it was, about 9 to 10% about 3 years ago. So inflation, I can say, is under control. And in fact, wholesale price index has been in the negative territory. That means the growth is minus some percent. It is in the negative territory for about last 1 year. From November last year, the growth is in the negative side, which means that the wholesale prices are sort of coming down. So inflation is under control. The third key economic indicator, apart from growth, inflation, the third key economic indicator are the deficit figures. There are the twin deficits of the fiscal deficit and the current account deficit. Fiscal deficit is basically the deficit in the government's budget, which is today well under control. It had reached 6.8% in 2008, 9, 10. It had reached 6.8%. Then it came down to 6.4%. Slowly thereafter, it has come down steadily. Last year, our fiscal deficit was 4%. This year, the government has kept a target of 3.9%, and we are confident that government will achieve that 3.9% fiscal deficit in the current year. Apart from fiscal deficit, we have the current account deficit. Current account deficit is basically the difference between, how much of, in the current account transactions of the country, how much of dollars are coming in, how much of dollars are going out, whether you are in deficit or you are in surplus. In other words, whether more dollars are coming in than the dollars are going out, or the other way. In our case, of course, there is a deficit because we are major importers of commodities like oil, and particularly oil, which accounts for almost 60 to 70% of our imports. So India will, because we are major commodity importer, and India is not we do not have a huge amount of oil reserves. So I think for the next few years, we will continue to be importers of oil, and because we need that as a source of our energy. And India will have a current account deficit. But I am happy to mention that current account deficit has also significantly come down, and it's about 1.6, 1.3% in that region. So it is just about little higher than 1%. So current account deficit is also under control. Now, because of that, the Reserve Bank of India has been able to build up a huge quantum of foreign exchange reserves. Today, the latest figure which I have with me about just 3-4 days ago, the figure, it's about, we hold about something like 352 billion of US dollars as our foreign exchange reserves. Now, there's a very, very comfortable position, and that gives a lot of strength to our economy, because in the event of certain international developments taking place, we are well balanced in our current account deficit, and we should be able to meet any of these, any kind of challenge which may arise. The fourth indicator of how an economy is doing is your tax collections. Compared to last year, this year's tax collections look far better, and the overall growth in the net tax collections in the indirect taxes, it's about 36%. Now, 36% growth, of course, is mainly because of some additional excise duties and cess which government imposed on petrol and diesel. But if you remove the new taxation measures, even then the growth in indirect taxes, which is basically service tax and central excise, is about 15 to 16%. And that, I think, is a very good sign, because this year we are expecting our nominal growth of GDP to be in the region of we are expecting about, let's say, about 11 to 12%, because you have 7.5% growth plus the inflation at about 5%, so about 12.5%. So if your nominal growth of GDP is 12%, 12.5%, and if your tax collections are doing better, 2 to 3% better, I think it's a very good and very positive sign. Direct tax collections also are doing reasonably well. It can do better. But as you know, the companies are yet to, the corporate results are not as satisfying as they should have been or as they should be. But even then, direct tax collections on a net basis, they are recording a growth of about 12%, which is far better than last year. Now, all these are basically the impact of the large number of reform measures which have been undertaken in the last 1.5 years. So we can confidently say that our economy, our policy is on the right track. The result of every policy decision that you take will take time. In the real economy, in the real world, you cannot do something today and expect results tomorrow. Things do take time. Things take 1 year, 1.5 years, 2 years to have their impact. So the better tax collection figures is an indication that the economic policy, that the reforms are on the right track. The fifth indicator is the capital expenditure which is being undertaken by the overall capital expenditure in the economy. Now, unfortunately, the private sector investment continues to be sluggish because of large number of problems, because of stressed assets, because of demand not being as robust as it should be. But let me mention that the government capital expenditure and the public sector capital expenditure are doing very well. This year, government's capital expenditure so far have recorded a growth of more than 60%, more than 60% compared to last year. So government's capital expenditure are far higher, and the capital expenditure of the central public sector undertakings are also well under control, and they are achieving their targets. It was reviewed recently by the finance minister about a fortnight ago, and we found that most of the central public sector undertakings, their capital expenditure programs are well under control, and they are achieving their targets. Sixth point is with regard to one of the key indicators of how the economy is doing is the FDI inflows, the foreign direct investment inflows. In FDI also, the net increase in FDI has been 40%, 40% till now. Now, people very often ask me that, we see, but where is the impact? We don't see it. It's a very valid question. It's very, you have to see it visible. But let me assure you that all these investment numbers, I mean, obviously this money, 40% increase in FDI, the money is going somewhere and it is getting invested somewhere. So obviously it will produce results and it will take time. The demand in the automobile sector has picked up in the last couple of months, whether it is scooters or it is four-wheelers, they have picked up. I picked up the automobile sector to refer to it because it has got a very big multiplier effect. So these are the broad, the economic indicators which I wanted to highlight. I would next turn to what are the key challenges that the global economy faces and what in India we consider as major policy challenges which we have to address and which I can confidently say that the government is addressing in a very aggressive manner. First, I have mentioned is to take the growth back to 8% and 8% plus. Second is to create more jobs, both rural and urban jobs. India, we have, almost 65% of our population is the young population, young working population. And unless we find adequate number of jobs, this demographic advantage can become a demographic liability, leading to other kinds of social tensions and social problems, which is not a desirable thing to happen. So that is a key challenge and which is being addressed. I will come to it, how it is being addressed. The third is to how to revive the private sector investment sentiment. The fourth is how to increase the savings rate. When our economy was doing very well, the domestic savings rate had reached almost 35% of our GDP. Today we are about around 30% of GDP. So the key challenge is to take back the, the savings rate again back to 35% or above. It's inherent in Indian nature that we save a lot. In fact, when we interact with when we interact with experts from other countries, they say that they cannot believe it because the savings rate in a country like USA is about 3% or so, I am told, because that's a spending economy. They like to spend. It is a part of their culture. But in Indian culture, our culture is one of saving. Whenever we get money, all of us, you and I, we always try to save something so that, it's, whether it is for your children's education or it's for your own future or it's for your health challenges or you want to use that money to invest in a house or whatever. I think savings mentality is ingrained into our habit and we need to revive our savings habit. So these are the main challenges, and I will just very briefly also say how these problems, how these challenges are being addressed. Globally, the challenge remains, I have already touched upon it. Europe should come out of its crisis. Africa should put its act together, put its infrastructure, fix its infrastructure problem and fix its political problem, because that has a potential to be the growth driver for the world. China also needs to take bold decisions in terms of reforms, in terms of reviving their financial and banking system, because we do not have full information about how their banking system is performing. So China needs to follow their policy, and the way the Chinese economy behaves has a lot of impact on India. It does not impact us in the way Chinese economy would impact, let us say, a country like Thailand or Malaysia or Taiwan or other countries which are part of the Chinese value chain. When I say value chain, what I mean is that the Chinese manufacturers somewhere in the value chain, somewhere in terms of supplying inputs and raw materials or in terms of purchasing finished products, you are linked to the Chinese manufacturing, either in the back end in terms of supplying raw materials to Chinese manufacturing companies, or in terms of purchasing goods produced and manufactured in China in the front end part of it. Fortunately, India is not a part of the global value chain which is built around China. So since we are not a part of the global value chain of China, we are to that extent, as an economy, India is well insulated. But Chinese economy also is hitting us in another manner, because they have excess capacity in areas like steel, in aluminium, and in so many other areas. So naturally, there is a tendency for the Chinese companies now to dump steel, aluminium at throwaway prices. The government has responded to it by levying an anti-dumping, a safeguard duty of 20%. Apart from increasing the customs duty on steel, the government has also levied a safeguard duty of 20%. So today the duty on import of Chinese steel is something like 32.5%. But even with that 32.5% duty, the Chinese companies are still selling it at a lower price because they have excess capacity, they have excess production. So that is a challenge which is there for us, and we are impacted. I cannot say that we are completely insulated. We are insulated to the extent that we are not a part of the Chinese value chain, but we are not insulated so far as supply of this kind of dumping problem which is now being encountered vis-a-vis the Chinese suppliers. The other global challenge today is how the US Fed, that is the counterpart of our Reserve Bank of India, how the US Fed withdraws from its monetary expansion policy. You would have seen in the newspapers over the last several months or in the last 1 or 2 years, every now and then there are reports by experts about the US Fed rates, whether the USA is going to roll back their expansionary policy. You will recall, at the beginning of my address, I did mention that the Chinese, US undertook monetary expansion. So US has pumped in a lot of money into the market, and that is the borrowings of the US have gone up, through issue of treasury bills, through issue of various other government instruments. They have borrowed and they have injected, the US Fed has injected a lot of money into the global financial system. And the interest rates have been reduced. But now the time has come for US, and the US did it mainly to revive the growth. And US has been able to do it and sustain it because, dollar is the international reserve currency. India cannot do that, another country cannot do that because rupee is not the international reserve currency. Or any other country, dollar is the international reserve currency, so therefore USA is able to do that. But I think since the US job figures are showing some improvement, there is expectation that the United States will sooner or later, perhaps in December, they will start increasing the interest rates, and that will have a lot of impact on volatility of the international markets. But having said that, let me also say, I don't want to create a sense of alarm. Let me also say that thanks to the mechanism and the interaction today we have in the global platform like the G20, and the dialogue which goes on between the central banks of each and every country, we have now, we meaning India and other developing countries, the message has been conveyed to the US, and I think US has also accepted this message that whatever policy adjustment, rate adjustment they should do it in a very cautious and calibrated manner so that the international financial markets are not hit by volatility. I think last time also everybody expected, in October, everybody expected that the USA will increase the policy rates, but they did not increase the interest rates because there is realization that they want to be much clearer about the actual revival of the US economy, and at the same time, they also want to do it in a manner that it does not create global financial or monetary volatility. Even in the latest pronouncement which was made by the Fed Governor Janet Yellen, she has also mentioned that they will do a very calibrated and cautious adjustment. So therefore, I think although the challenge remains about challenges arising out of the adjustment of policy rates, but I think US will do it in a very cautious manner. Now, having mentioned all these points, I'll just finish in 5 minutes. Having talked about all these issues, I would like to touch upon the various reform measures which the government has undertaken and which the government is undertaking now, which will make a difference so far as our economy is concerned. I mentioned about growth. Now I will just touch upon, I have got several points. I will very quickly run through them because I don't want to bore you further with this kind of this thing. I don't know whether what I'm saying, whether it makes any sense, but I'll just quickly run through some of the points, the various reform measures which are being undertaken by the government. The first reform measure, the first and foremost priority so far as government is concerned is early implementation of the goods and services tax, early implementation of the GST. India is a divided market. Every state is a separate market. We as a country do not have a common market. As a result, we have a situation where you don't, the value chain is not an all India value chain. The value chain, you have islands of, one state, Tamil Nadu, another state, Maharashtra. So if you supply some input, some automobile component you supply from Chennai to a car manufacturer in Maharashtra, then you pay the tax here, but you don't get the tax credit for having supplied it to Maharashtra. In central excise, you get it because central excise is an all India tax. But where it comes to sales tax, what is now known as VAT, you don't get any tax credit. So that adds to your cost. And therefore, it also results in a situation where there is tax on tax. And then we have multiplicity of taxes. Every state has its VAT, number of taxes. You have entertainment tax, you have luxury tax, you have additional sales tax, you have, additional VAT, you have VAT. This multiplicity of taxes. So the whole idea of GST is to have India as one market, to avoid a situation where you have tax on tax, and to have a simple tax structure to avoid multiplicity of taxes and have a reasonable rate, so that India is one common market, and that will improve the competitiveness of Indian manufacturing industry. Experts have said that the introduction of GST will give a boost to our GDP by about 1.5 to 2%. I'm quite confident that the GST will come sooner or later. Whether it will happen in the winter session or in the budget session, that's a parliamentary issue. I'm not competent to talk on that, and I would not like to talk on that. But so far as the administrative preparedness of central and state governments are concerned, both the central government and the state governments are administratively well prepared to introduce GST at the earliest. The legislation, the bills are ready, the administrative manuals are ready, the IT backbone is being rolled out. It will be ready. The trial run will start on 1st January. So administratively, we are ready to introduce GST. And internationally, our interaction with other countries also shows that almost every big economy today, whether it is USA or Europe or other emerging economies, they are looking at India, how India is able to navigate its reforms. They are very keen that GST comes in India because that will give a lot of boost to Indian growth. And that will open up a lot of opportunities for, companies that side to come and invest in India, to manufacture in India, to sort of supply to the Indian market. The second policy reform area, the key reform area, is in the area of tax administration and tax policy. With regard to, GST is also relates to taxation, but when I talk of tax administration, I am just referring to the income tax and the direct taxation side, where you would have seen that yesterday the government has announced, removal of the exemptions. Now, because you have got so many exemptions which are given under income tax, there are plethora of exemptions, and all the litigation that we have in our country relating to taxes are because of these exemptions. So the exemptions are being removed, and the income tax rates also, the government has said the corporate tax rates will be reduced from 30% to 25% in a gradual manner over the next 3 to 4 years. The third biggest reform agenda that the government has is to enact a bankruptcy law. In our country, it's very easy to start a company, but it's like the Chakravyuh. You start a company, you enter the business, but to exit, to close down the company, to go for liquidation is a horrendous task. It is, it's a long drawn process, and it is very difficult. It creates problems because your assets are locked up, resources are locked up, and a business should be allowed to close, a business should be allowed to die when it wants to die, when it wants to close down. So in fact, in the ease of doing business analysis which the World Bank has done, the absence of a bankruptcy law is seen as a major deficiency, major minus point so far as our ease of doing business is concerned. The bankruptcy law, government had appointed a committee. The Vishwanathan committee has given its recommendations, submitted its report recently. Very recently, they have submitted about 3 weeks ago. They have submitted the report to government, and that's on. It's our endeavor to introduce that legislation in the parliament at the earliest. The fourth challenge is to fix the problems of stressed assets in the banking sector. So we require a lot of banking sector reforms. In banking sector, a policy of Indradhanush, which mainly relates to governance and improving the governance systems in the banks, especially the public sector banks, these measures have been introduced. But dealing with the stressed assets is a major challenge, and that the government is now, there are various options are under consideration in the government, and I would expect some very bold decisions to be taken by the government with regard to fixing the problem of the stressed assets, and basically fixing the problem of bringing about banking sector reforms. The fifth area is to open up the external commercial borrowing regime, because many of our companies require a lot of external borrowings, and in this, between Finance Ministry and Reserve Bank of India, we have worked together a series of liberalization measures. These have been put in the public domain, and the comments from the public were invited. RBI has examined those comments. They have shared those comments with us. We are now discussing with RBI, and I would expect before the end of the month a major liberalization of the ECB policy, that is the policy of external commercial borrowings, to be announced before the end of the month. Next point, the sixth point is something which the Prime Minister had spoken about on 15th August in, while addressing the nation from the Red Fort. He had talked about startups. He had used this phrase, startup stand-up. Startup companies have a very important role to create more number of jobs. There are lots of young entrepreneurs. There are lots of young innovative minds. There are lots of graduates from engineering colleges, from commerce colleges, a lot of graduates who are from general who have done arts or science courses, but full of lot of innovative ideas. They are the ones who are starting new companies, new businesses, whether it's a company or it's a limited liability partnership or it's a private firm. So government today is working on, based on the announcement made by the Prime Minister, we are now working on providing an enabling ecosystem, an enabling environment where it becomes easier for startup companies to access equity money, because these are all youngsters full of ideas but lack of resources. So this should be given, from where they will access equity, from where they will get loans, and the ease of doing business. That is, too much of regulations, too much of controls and other things should be liberalized. So startup companies, the government is now emphasizing, and I think the policy announcements should be made quite soon. The seventh point is the area where we are working, government is working very strongly, is with regard to the infrastructure sector, fixing the sectoral issues. There have been problems around railways, there have been problems around power generation, the power sector, there have been problems around the road sector. Road sector fortunately has picked up, a lot of constructions are going on. Power sector, recently the government has announced a major financial restructuring of the electricity distribution companies. This policy was announced, approved by the cabinet about 2 weeks ago. And so various infrastructure sectoral issues are being addressed. Eighth point is with regard to FDI policy. Now, FDI policy, foreign direct investment policy, the process of liberalization will continue. I think after 1991, when the FDI policies were liberalized, the latest announcement made by the government is perhaps the single largest policy decision in FDI made in the last 2.5 decades. A large number of sectors, the sectoral caps, that is, for every sector you can bring in 26% equity, you can bring in 74% of equity. So government took the view that where we are permitting somebody to bring 26% FDI in a company, let's allow him to go to 49%, because both are same. 26% gives you only a power to block certain special resolutions in the company. But all of you who are, who have experience in running companies or who have seen how companies work, how many special resolutions come? So it's just an issue of mindset. So wherever 26% was allowed, FDI has been allowed to go up to 49%. Wherever FDI was allowed up to 74%, it has been made 100%. And whatever is up to 49%, excepting few sectors, they have all been put on the automatic route. They don't need to come to our department, to the Foreign Investment Promotion Board, that is FIPB, for a clearance. In fact, I, as Secretary of the Department of Economic Affairs, I chair the FIPB meetings. And I found that a lot of proposals which come and you go on, in a meeting, you just go on clearing them. So at the end of the day, you ask yourself, why this proposal came to the FIP in the first place? You don't have an answer. So therefore, government has very rightly put as many FDIs as possible on the automatic route. And today almost, I would say that about 96-97% of our FDI will come in the automatic route. Just about 3 to 4% will come through the FIPB route. Because we don't, this is the whole policy of what the government has been talking about, minimum government and maximum governance. You set the rules, you set the parameters very clearly upfront in a transparent manner. Then don't interfere unnecessarily, don't expect people to come to you every occasion for a permission or for a license. Now the FDI policy liberalization is a continuing exercise, and I'm sure it will continue. One of the major liberalizations which has been done in the latest FDI policy announcement is with regard to the real estate sector. Now today, if you go around any urban center or even any tier 2 cities, you find a lot of real estate projects half complete. They're not able to complete because the promoters have, these assets have become non-performing assets, or the promoters do not have the resources. They're not able to complete the projects. Individuals who have tried to purchase a flat, they have made advance payment of few installments. The flats are not being delivered. Money is locked. Bank finances are locked. So you have large number of half-complete projects. Then you have large number of completed projects where the developers and promoters want to take out their money and move on and invest in some other new project or in some other investment. They are also not able to take out their money because there are no big buyers. So this real estate sector, opening up of the FDI in real estate sector is, in my own understanding, and this is the understanding we have in government, it's not my personal understanding alone, that this opening up is, I think, is going to be a very big growth driver in the months and in the years to come. Because construction sector means more demand for steel, more demand for cement, more jobs of construction workers, both skilled and non-skilled, more demand for, electric, for the supply of domestic furnishings, for supply of all these electrical fittings, for supply of all the sanitary fittings. So this is, I think, going to be a very big growth driver in the coming months and in the coming years. But at the same time, we have been very careful, government has been very careful to ensure, because we have this mindset that all real estate investment is hot money. Now it is not so. If there is a worry that the foreign investment will come and then it will go back, to safeguard against that, government has put a 3-year lock-in period. So if you bring foreign direct investment into the real estate sector, for 3 years you cannot take out your money. But there is another kind of flexibility has been given. If a company from US has brought in money and after 1 year he wants to take out his money for whatever reason, he can transfer it to another foreign investor. In other words, the shares will transfer between a non-resident to another non-resident, from one foreign company to another foreign company. But dollar will not flow out of India. So therefore, we have hedged ourselves, we have protected ourselves from the risk of dollars coming in and suddenly vanishing. At the same time, we have facilitated a lot of investment to come into the real estate sector, and I think this is going to be a very big game changer so far as injecting the required economic boost to our economy is concerned. Then apart from that, the 9th point I would like to highlight is with regard to ease of doing business. A lot of process reforms are being carried out by the government to give clearances, environmental permissions, the FIPB clearances, etc. The 10th point I would like to mention is with regard to the huge program which the government has launched, the Skill India mission, which has been launched. So together with startups and the Skill India mission, I mentioned, if you recall, I mentioned about the necessity to create more jobs. So I think the startup ecosystem which will facilitate large number of startup companies to come. And these small companies, each of these companies, we are looking at a situation where each of these small companies will create 20 jobs, 30 jobs, 40 jobs. Now just imagine if totally we have hundreds of startup companies and each of them creating 30, 40, 50 jobs, the kind of potential it has in terms of creating more employment opportunities in our economy. But we need a skilled population, because we need our youngsters, our youth to be skilled, so that our demographic advantage continues to be a demographic advantage and doesn't become a liability in the future. So the Skill India mission is one program which is being launched in a very strong manner, and that is being taken forward. Now, apart from that, we have other programs the government has launched. I will not like to go into that. Programs like Digital India and basically, harnessing technology into our process reforms. So there are many more reforms, but I would not like to, I can go on and on and on. But these are some of the important ones which I listed out, which I thought I should share with an august and very much aware and conscious audience that we have here today. To conclude, I would like to say that so far as reforms are concerned, the reforms are a continuing process, and so far as the government is concerned, reforms are a 24/7 exercise. Government will not wait for an event like the budget to announce reforms. FDI reforms could have been delayed till the budget. But since the policy decisions were ready, and let me mention that this decision was taken in great speed. This kind of speed in government decision making is something which is today particularly noteworthy. So government will not wait for a major event like the budget to announce reforms. Government will not delay any reforms. If a particular reform is ready, if we have examined it and we are ready, reform measures will be announced. So it will be a continuous exercise. Reforms will be a 24/7 exercise so far as the government is concerned. We as a country, whether we are in government or we are outside, I think together we should do our best, and we are committed to ensure that the growth that we unleash a lot of forces which will eventually generate growth and good life for our people. As The Economist magazine described in its publication about a year ago or year and a half ago, this is India's chance to fly. And I think all of us Indians should do our best to ensure that the country really flies. Thank you very much.
Sir, you started with pre-liberalization and gone and extended up to minimum governance, and it's gone about 24/7. Sir, I think we must give a good hand to Mr. Shaktikant Das for an excellent address, sir. It's a great learning experience for everybody, and spelled out about the government's vision. Yeah, Secretary is kind enough to take few questions, but let it be very specific, and can list out to only few ones, and may now request the participants to introduce themselves and have one or two few questions.
Good evening, sir. Sir, my question to you is based on the lecture that you gave on the fall in private investment. We do notice that private investment has come down since the previous years, and while the government is at a stage of phasing out deductions, exemptions, and on the fiscal side, we notice that my question to you is India ready for this fiscal regearing of a saga of no exemptions, no deductions, or do Indian businessmen need the incentives like your ATIA or your ATHHC or your SEZs and all those kinds of benefits for them to invest more? Isn't it a dichotomy?
You see, first thing is that the reduction in corporate tax will be gradual. it's not going to be overnight from 30%, it's not going to be reduced to 25%. It will be done over a period of 3 to 4 years. That will make us competitive vis-a-vis all our neighbors. If you see the ASEAN rates and rates which is prevalent in other countries, the rates are about 20%, 22%, 23%. We are 30%. Today, if there is a, first I am saying from the international perspective, then I will talk about from our domestic perspective. The international investor today, he has a choice of investing either in Malaysia or in Thailand or in India or in any other country. One key parameter when he does his calculation is the tax, the tax administration and the tax rates. So we compare very unfavorably there. So that is why the effort is to take our tax rates to 25%. Secondly, I mean, having worked in the revenue department, having worked as revenue secretary, I can tell you with certainty that the benefit of tax exemptions is mostly enjoyed by the big companies. Small and medium enterprises, maybe at the beginning when the industry is being set up, a new SME, small and medium enterprise is being set up, at that stage he gets some depreciation and he gets some tax benefits. But a SME, a small and medium unit, is not in a position to invest year after year to get the benefit of depreciation, accelerated depreciation, additional depreciation and other kinds of benefits. So invariably, majority, almost all SMEs end up by paying 30% tax. Whereas the big companies, if the MAT was not there, if minimum alternate tax was not there, they would all be paying less than 10% tax. So the biggest beneficiary, the biggest losers, I'm not blaming anyone for this. That is a policy of the government. If I have a big company, if government gives me a certain advantage, I will enjoy it. Naturally, there's nothing wrong in it. But SMEs are not in a position to get the benefit. So if we are looking at more investments to come in any case, the big companies are paying about 18.5% already, and 18.5 plus the surcharge, etc. put together is about 20-21% they are paying already. So the big companies probably will move from about 20-21% to 25%, and the small and medium-sized companies which are today paying 30% plus this surcharge and all that, they will move to 25%. So therefore, overall, if you see, it will be beneficial for the economy. And litigation, almost 70% of our tax litigation, the tax arbitrage, the harassment, all this thing is because of the exemptions. You have an exemption, I am the tax officer, so I can use my power to extract something, The arbitrage and all these things come where exemptions are available. Once you remove exemptions, then I can assure you that litigations will automatically vanish. 70% of the litigation will just simply go. So I think overall it's good for our economy, and as an economy I think the industry and the business should really calculate their financials not in terms of depending on the kind of arbitrage which government will today give some exemption, withdraw it tomorrow. It leads to a lot of uncertainty also. So it's better to have a stability and certainty of policy where all round it will be good for the economy.
Sir, my first question is, you touched about this current account deficit during the time when rupee versus dollar was at the peak of 68 rupees. In this, leaving aside the import and export deficit, the investment of the Indian companies abroad and import of gold played a vital role. Where do we stand now to control this, to bring the current account deficit? You have said that crude prices are less, but the disturbing factor is the import of crude is less. That means the consumption by the industries is less, which will in turn will affect the growth of industry. Secondly, my question is regarding the GST. The manufacturing state is not in an advantageous position, whereas the consuming state has got. How this is addressed into that? And the third one is Make in India. See, the 30% local content was the past procedure whenever the FDI is allowed. Now it seems that it is relaxed. As the RBI governor said, it's not only make in India, make for India will be the beneficial for the economy of this country. Where do this government's policy addresses this thing?
What was the first one? First one was current account deficit, you said. You see, we have benefited because of the low oil prices, low crude prices. Obviously, we have benefited out of that for our current account deficit. So far as gold is concerned, the gold imports today, there's a customs duty of 10%. Notwithstanding the 10%, lot of smuggling is taking place, but it goes to the credit of our customs department that they are, they have very effectively, they are taking action. But the duty of 10%, and there are some restrictions earlier, this business of 80-20, you import 100, let us say you import 100 grams of gold, then you have to export 20, so that, you can, and you have to use 80 and then you export 20, then you can import another, all kinds of restrictions where that was leading to a lot of unfair practices in the market. Only some people were benefiting, so that has been removed. So gold imports are today well under control. Crude prices are low. Hopefully they will continue to be low. There are experts who say that it will remain at the current level. It will go down to 40 or even below $40. But again, crude prices are something which just cannot be predicted. So current account deficit, I think, is well under control. And you mentioned about gold, and what else? Huh? And outward FDI. Now, outward FDI is a good sign. I mean, it's a good sign that our companies today are becoming international companies. If Tatas are going and becoming one of the largest job providers in UK, I think it's a matter of pride for our country. Next, you talked about GST, that the manufacturing states will lose and the consuming states will benefit. Now, let me tell you, it's only in theory. You take a consuming states. Consuming states are basically, compared to manufacturing states like Tamil Nadu or Maharashtra or Gujarat, a consuming state is not as developed. So the average purchasing power in a consuming state is much less. Whereas the average purchasing power in a manufacturing state, because of our high salaries, high wages, and because of more development, the average purchasing power in a state like Tamil Nadu or Maharashtra or Gujarat is much higher than several other states which are not as developed. So in the market, you may have more buyers there. More manufacturing goods may be going from here to there. But average purchasing power is more here. So therefore, the manufacturing states, because of higher purchase arising from higher income levels, the manufacturing states will gain out of GST. I can say it with confidence. Maybe initially 1 or 2 years there will be a revenue dip because the central sales tax, where they get about 1,500 crores, that goes. So maybe for 1 or 2 or 3 years there may be some loss. But I can tell you with confidence that from the 3rd or 4th year onwards, the manufacturing states will gain more, and because of India becoming one market, the competitiveness of the manufacturing states will go up. The purchasing power, average purchasing power of our boys and girls who are working in many companies will go up. So therefore, GST is not a one-sided thing for the benefit of the consuming states. It will benefit the manufacturing states also. And the third point was... No, 30% local content. You see, there is a lot of misunderstanding around it. Earlier, what did it say? Now, from the date you bring the FDI, you have to have 30% local content. Now, I am bringing my money from a foreign country today. From tomorrow, how do I do 30% local sourcing? I have to set up my, I have to get a premises. I have to take something on rent. I have to start manufacturing. I have to start my shop. I have to build up my, supply chain, distribution network. So I need a lot of preparation time. So because of this artificial, unrealistic condition, this sector has not really taken off. We put restrictions. You see, we expect people to go into the football field and play. But we tie their hand, we tie their leg, and how does he run? He's not able to run. How can he play football, please? So therefore, This condition was totally impractical, and because of this condition, nothing was happening. Now what the government has said, that it will be 30% from the date of starting of business, from the date of commercial operation. In other words, the gestation period, the time you will take to, to set up your shop, to get everything ready. Obviously, during that time, you are not, you have no operations, you have no business. So how can you buy, 30% local? You will buy 30% local sourcing, you will do only when your business starts. So this is a much more realistic and pragmatic decision which will produce results. The earlier condition was not leading to anywhere. Sorry.
Come to a new chair now. My question to you is, there's a serious contraction in the rural economy. Commodity prices are lower. I'm not saying it's the government's decisions which have led to it. There's availability of capital in the rural areas is much lower. Capital formation is negative in the agricultural sector. Of course, it's more the job of the agricultural ministry to probably look at it. But overall, how would the government actually handle a situation like this? Because there is rural distress, whatever we may say. There is significant rural distress, and there is significant dip in rural spending. I don't know if it is evident otherwise, but most consumer durable manufacturers claim so.
No, I mean, we are aware about the rural, the stress and the distress or whatever you call it. We are aware of that problem of, this year again, third consecutive year, we have had a very bad and uncertain monsoon. And so naturally the farm incomes have been affected. Then you have the problem of rural indebtedness. There are issues relating to absence of well-performing, well-working insurance, crop insurance scheme in our country. So these are issues of farm incomes, crop insurance, rural debt, rural indebtedness. All these issues are being looked into by the government, and to ensure that whatever is manufactured, of course, we have got whatever is produced. We have the MSP mechanism for rice and wheat and now pulses. And so government is really taking upon itself a lot of responsibility to see that, this has to be, the problems of the sector are addressed. This is one area where the government is fully engaged, and I would expect some, decisions to be taken in the coming months. But what you have mentioned is a very important point, and government is aware of certain challenges in this sector, and it is work in progress.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Prabhakaran. I am the president of the Madras Chamber of Commerce. First, let me thank you for having come here and then addressed us. For most of us, I think, who are from the chamber, it sounded like it just poured. The information flow that you gave us, the cogency, and the points that you really told and then connected. See, it's the connecting the dots which is very important. And that gave us a real insight into where this economy is. And I can tell you that it is like what Chennai received in the last 1 week. It just poured. We just sank. So congratulations to you on that. Second point, it's also a revelation that you spoke about the FDI. It is almost like 91. Thank you for having said that. It looked like that, but then when somebody in your place says that, then it actually impacts us. We understand what is the impact of that. Third point, you spoke about the real estate. And you mentioned about how real estate will really kickstart the economy and how it is interconnected with so many industries and the consumption. No, but there is one difficulty which I would like you to take note of, which I'm sure the government has taken note of, that is with reference to environment clearance. Especially you spoke about the residential sector, and that is huge. But if the environment clearance is not going to be given, for example, it is unlike an industry. What is that building residential apartments got to do with an environmental clearance where it has to go through so many hurdles? It's, in fact, in Chennai at least, about 20-25 companies have been issued with notices of penalties varying from 5 crores to almost 30 crores, and most of them have stopped work. And that is nothing to do with how they are going to pollute. Everything is being connected to the sewage system, or it is being prepared there. But there is a difficulty with reference to environment clearance. Even if the foreign money is going to come, it is not going to kickstart. I just want you to possibly comment on this environment clearance, whether something could be done both at the central level as well as at the state level.
No, I have made a note of your point. I mean, it is an impediment. We are aware of this. As a part of this ease of doing business exercise, the World Bank does a rating for India. Now, in association with the World Bank, there is a rating of states which is being done. Now, Maharashtra earlier used to, Mumbai city used to take a lot of time to give, various permissions and clearances. But because of this thrust around, ease of doing business and the concern of Maharashtra government to improve their ranking, lot of process reforms have taken place. Now, today there is a lot of competition among states. You do process reforms, you ease the process, you attract more money, you attract more investments. So I think it's a healthy competition which is going among the states, and that itself, I think, will spur most of the states to simplify their procedures. So far as the central government is concerned, I have made a note of your point. We are aware of this point, and we'll see what can be done.
Any other questions? Yeah. Yeah, can give it.
I'm Lata, Director of MAFWA. We are into HR services. So this is regarding the Skill India program. Basically, you're talking about it. I just want to know, we all know that today it's very difficult to get people, even youngsters, to get into the core areas, like whether it's plumbing, tooling, and all those kind of things. And without that, I think it's going to be very difficult to take this program. And is there anything we're doing in terms of campaign to create the dignity of labor? I think, in my view, the last few years, I can see the hospitality industry, or also today the taxi drivers, that way, thanks to many of those cab companies which have come. I think there's a lot more acceptance. But in many industries, in many areas, I think this acceptance is not there. Even you go to a village today, I go there and I ask a guy, he says, I want to work in an IT industry. Okay, so but then it's not possible. So how do we really do that? And is Skill India doing anything to create that awareness and also that dignity of labor?
I think it's a very good point you have made. The National Skill Development Corporation was earlier coming out with some advertisements and other things, but these things cannot be done through newspaper advertisements. I think it's a question of our mindset. In Western countries, we see youngsters who are studying or who are doing research. In part-time, they come and do all kinds of odd jobs. In India, we have this mindset problems, and that reminds me of what the famous economist of the greatest economist of his times, John Maynard Keynes, he said. He said the difficulty is not in adopting new ideas. The difficulty lies in giving up old ones. So that, I think, is the biggest challenge. I entirely agree, lot of campaign will have to be done. Tamil Nadu has a skill development, I think they have a skill mission, state skill mission, Tamil Nadu has, and the department they have. Many states have it. But your point is well taken. I think this needs to be a kind of a campaign, and I will convey it to the right quarters at the appropriate time to see that something is really done. Now, what that appropriate quarters is, I would not like to specify, but I will convey it.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure. I'm trying to honor our chief guest. On behalf of the organizers, the Southern India Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and G. Ramachandran Memorial Committee. I request Mr. Javagar Vadivelu, the immediate past president, to come onto the dais, please, to honor Mr. Shaktikantas, please. Thank you, sir. May I now request Mr. Navneet Ganapati, the CEO of Advent Sports, to propose the formal vote of thanks.
At the outset, I'd like to thank Sri Shaktikantas sir for taking time out of his busy schedule, and some of his thoughts were very, very inspirational, cerebral, and I'm sure my grandfather would have really appreciated your speech, sir. Thank you. Unfortunate that Dr. Rao uncle, who has always been the guiding force for our family, could not make it today due to a sudden personal commitment. Thanks Venkatesan uncle for agreeing to be here at such short notice and give a wonderful tribute about my grandfather. Thank you. I'd be failing in my duty if I don't thank Natarajan uncle for always blessing us. Last but not the least, Sikhi for putting the entire lecture together. My sincere thanks to all members of our family and friends to have come today, and we're really honored. My parents and my cousin Krishna are glad that under the aegis of Sikhi, we are having this annually. Thank you all. May I now request everyone to rise for the national anthem.